In 1995, two subway trains collided on the Williamsburg Bridge. In today's video, I'm going to teach you about how the New York City subway system is supposed to work and what went horribly wrong that day. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's get into today's story. The New York City subway system is one of the largest rapid transit systems in the world. As of today, there are 472 subway stations along 691 miles of track. If you were to drive a car straight from New York City for 691 miles, you could end up in Indiana or South Carolina. This is a very complicated system. Nearly 70,000 people are employed by New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority, or the MTA. There are 22 different subway lines that are each marked by letter or number, and 3 separate shuttle trains that will each only make one stop, and they're all marked with an S. And even though all of these different trains have different starting points and ending points, a lot of those stops that they make in the middle are shared stops with other train lines. So in other words, all of these different trains share track for a majority of their trips. A lot of that track actually travels above ground as well. A lot of people don't realize how much elevated track there actually is in New York City. Only 59% of subway platforms are fully underground, and most of them are in Manhattan. The last important fact I need you to know for this story is the New York City subway system never sleeps. It runs 24 hours a day, all days of the year. Let's get into it now. So, on June 4th, 1995, at approximately 11:38 p.m., 46-year-old Leighton Gibson began his 8-hour shift as the motorman for the J train. The J train travels between Broad Street in Lower Manhattan and Jamaica Center out in Queens and makes a majority of its stops in Brooklyn. When the J train is traveling between Brooklyn and Manhattan, it needs to cross the East River, and it does so by means of the Williamsburg Bridge. The track along the bridge is shared with the M line and the Z line. At 6:18 a.m. on June 5th, so nearing the end of Gibson's shift, his J train would crash into the back of a stopped M train on the Williamsburg Bridge. So what happens? The Williamsburg Bridge uses a type of signaling system called fixed block. They look like traffic lights. If you see a green light, it's just like if you were in a car. You're good to go. If you see a yellow light, this means that you should proceed with caution because there is a red signal that is coming up. And if you see a red signal, you need to stop the train. Now, let's say hypothetically you got to a red signal and you went through it. What happens? Well, there's something called a trackside stop that's supposed to engage automatically. This acts as an emergency brake and it'll stop the train on its own. That's what it's supposed to do. However, along the Williamsburg Bridge, some of these signals hadn't been changed since 1918, so they were prone to malfunction. At 6:12 a.m., so 6 minutes before the crash, a westbound M train was given the red light signal because of an unscheduled work train in front of it. So the M train slowed to a stop. And this particular M train happened to be the very next train in front of Gibson's J train. Now, if you're ever on a subway train and it does come to a stop, even though it's not at a station, there's no reason to panic. This happens pretty frequently, and the conductor will usually come over the speaker and you'll pretend that you understood what they said, and then the train will just keep moving in a few minutes. When the M train stopped, a red signal would have been triggered for the fixed block behind it. At 6:18 a.m., when Gibson's J train approached that red signal, it continued to travel at 20 miles per hour instead of slowing down to 0. 7 seconds later, it smashed into the back of the M train in what was described as an explosion-like sound. Now here's the thing. This J train was not exceeding any speed limit. The speed limit here was 25 miles per hour, so he was 5 miles per hour under that. But this wasn't some sort of curved embankment. This was just a straight track directly over a bridge. So how did Gibson not see the train? And not only that, but if you remember from earlier, if you go through a red signal, there's supposed to be an automatic fail-safe emergency braking system. And yet, there were no skid marks on the tracks that implied that that braking system kicked in. And if you go back to the previous day, they had conducted tests on these signals that all came back saying that the system was working. But at that particular time, it didn't work, and nobody could explain why. Something else worth noting here, A passenger aboard Gibson's J train mentioned that they had narrowly avoided hitting that M train just a few stops earlier. When traveling westbound, the J and the M trains will meet at the Myrtle Avenue station in the Bushwick neighborhood of Brooklyn. And from there, they will share track until they get into Manhattan. But it was at this station that Gibson had to slam on the brakes in order to avoid a collision with the same M train. So what the heck is going on? Why is it that these two trains got so close together, not just one time, but twice, and the second time being a full-blown collision? The answer the National Transportation Safety Board came up with was Gibson was asleep. Now, was the 46-year-old Gibson approaching the end of an 8-hour shift that had begun just before midnight? Yes. But in his 14-year tenure with the MTA, Gibson never had a history of being a bad train driver. Sure, he had 3 minor operating violations, but these were all failures to align his train properly at the platform. In order to avoid misalignment at the train platform, in the center of it is a black and white strip called a zebra board, and a conductor in the middle of the train is supposed to lower their window and point out at it to make sure that all of the train cars are lined up on the platform properly. If they're not, then the doors could potentially open onto track, which is less than ideal. Because the MTA was rolling with the idea that Gibson had fallen asleep, they tested his blood to see if there were any drugs or alcohol in his system that would have affected his inability to stop the train. But when they sent in those tests, they all came back negative. Unfortunately, Gibson did not survive the crash. He was pronounced dead on site and likely died instantly. He was the only fatality. The emergency medical technician reported that his body was suspended in the air in almost a standing-like position and crushed in the cabin in the front of the train. At least what was left of the cabin. The walls around him had collapsed and the floor was gone. He was actually being held up by the metalwork. This was the first fatal subway crash in 4 years, dating back to 1991 when there was a derailment at Union Square that killed 5 people. The Williamsburg Bridge crash was responsible for another 54 injuries, including one person who was critically injured. And here's another thing. This track is suspended above the rest of the traffic on the Williamsburg Bridge. So getting people off of the train, not the easiest task in the world. It took 3 hours to get everyone off of these trains. And remember, these people have neck injuries, back injuries, leg injuries. You needed to climb a 15-foot ladder just to get to the train. And if you're putting these people on a stretcher, good luck getting them down. Remember, you need to be super cautious because you're on a bridge. There's a huge drop-off to the East River. Now, this actually happened to be the second rear-end collision in just 4 months. So the MTA had to act fast. They sent someone out so that they could run their own investigation before anyone else could get there. And because the MTA is not computer-based, it's all human-operated, they're always looking to point fingers at somebody. And it just so happened that Leighton Gibson ended up getting the fingers pointed at him. But it's actually totally possible that Gibson was awake for the crash and that the faulty braking system is the reason this crash happened. Remember, a lot of these train signals hadn't been updated in 77 years. Train braking systems had changed since 1918, and trains might require some extra track space to come to a full stop, especially if you're traveling speeds like 20 miles per hour. So it is possible that if these fixed block signals had been updated and spread a little bit further apart, that this crash could have been avoided. Now, regardless of what you choose to believe in this story, the MTA would make some changes following the crash. Maximum speeds on straight track were reduced from 55 miles per hour to 40 miles per hour. If a train is traveling too fast, the MTA installed grade time signals, which will slow a train down automatically to whatever the maximum speed at that point of the track is. However, they changed so many signals within the system that it led to a huge increase in train delays throughout the city. It also doesn't help when idiots hold the train doors open. In 2017, Governor Cuomo declared a state of emergency for the MTA in regards to their ongoing reliability and crowding issues. The state of emergency ended in June 2021. And as we all know, there are never any problems in the New York City subway system now. Any surviving train cars from that crash were ultimately retired and sent to the Coney Island Yard, which is where they remain to this day. So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure that you like and subscribe, and also click the notification bell so you know each and every time I upload. Also, feel free to leave a comment letting me know some horror story that you've experienced in the New York City subway system. I'm sure you have one, right? And that's going to do it. Until next time, deuces, kids.